and welcome to the Your Financial Pharmacist Real Estate Investing Podcast, a show all about empowering pharmacists to achieve financial freedom through real estate investing. I'm Nate Hedrick, and each week, my co-host David Bright and I explore stories from pharmacists all over the country who are achieving their real estate goals while maintaining a meaningful career in pharmacy. Whether you're a first-time investor or a seasoned pro, we're here to provide education and inspiration about the world of real estate. Please note, this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and should not be considered financial or investment advice. Hey, David, how's it going?
Hey, good. Thanks, man. How you doing?
Doing quite well, trying to balance the usual game of living a double life as a pharmacist and a real estate investor. It's been fun.
Yeah, it definitely keeps life busy. We had a tenant turnover project just come to us that we weren't necessarily expecting, where the tenant moved out ahead of their lease being done. But managing and the value of a property manager that can just kind of handle that stuff is very much appreciated. So yeah, there are parts of the process that make this not all unicorns and rainbows. These discouraging things do happen. But again, part of the intelligent investing mindset just to get through that is getting your why and your goals clear. And I know we've talked about that so much in the podcast that it helps to overcome some of those rougher moments when your why and your goals are just very, very clear.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we thought it'd be great to bring on Dr. Louisa Wolowiecki. Wanted to bring her on. She is a experienced pharmacist, someone that has great impact in the functional medicine space, and now actually helps others with getting their mindset right so they can take on whatever they want and live the life that they're trying to live. Really just has some impressive credibility from working with many different types of pharmacy jobs and many different types of pharmacists. And again, gives them a great perspective on real estate, but also on just mindset in general.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to me. I think a lot of people jump into real estate with real estate is the goal, but I really like that her life by design, not by default approach serves real estate up as the mechanism and not the goal, where having life by design is the goal. And it's just interesting to me that she finds real estate to be a pathway to achieving that goal.
Yeah, I think that's going to resonate with a lot of our audience. I think she saw the long-term side of rental properties and how they can appreciate when they're cared for and how they can produce monthly income, which again, those multiple income streams can add up to different ways of living life, which I think is really cool. And it's not something that we always dive deeply into, but this is a great opportunity to do just that.
Yeah. And I also appreciate that she's really honest about her fears and the downsides of real estate investing, because that's definitely refreshing and respectable. A lot of people will jump on a podcast and talk about their best deal and this amazing thing that happened, and we don't always hear the downside of this. And so I think that it is important to recognize that real estate investing is not as simple as buying an index fund and then just not selling it for 20 years, right? Real estate can be a tool to help you reach your goal, and that requires work, but perhaps that work is worthwhile.
Yeah. Overall, just an awesome episode. So I hope you guys enjoy. And with that, I won't delay any further. We'll take you right to the show. Hey, Louisa, welcome to the show.
Hi. So happy to be here.
Yeah, we're glad you came on, and we were connecting on LinkedIn before this and said, gosh, we've got to have her on. She's got awesome mindset vibes that she's putting out there. We wanted to bring some of that to us and share it with our audience. So we appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate the invite.
Well, let's jump right in. Let's get with your pharmacy story and learn more about, your pharmacy career.
Okay. Well, I've been a pharmacist for a long time, too many years, actually, in some ways. But anyway, got involved as a pharmacist, wanting to be a pharmacist because of my strong passion with science and math, a long time ago. Had just a strong fascination with, knowing, understanding how our body works. And, I was the first in a big Italian family to even go to college, really, and to, become a professional. It was at a time where a lot of women went into careers like nursing and, secretaries and school teachers and all that kind of stuff. Being a pharmacist was kind of way out of the box. And even my class, was not even quite 50-50. I know it's kind of skewed the opposite way lots of times now. But anyway, and my reasons for going into it, in addition to loving the science and, understanding how the body works and medicines and all that kind of stuff seemed really fascinating to me. But I also wanted to do it because it seemed like it was a secure kind of profession at the time. And you could, necessarily have your own store if you wanted to go that route, be an entrepreneur, or you could, work part-time. You could work in the hospital, which I did almost all my internships in a hospital. So there just seemed to be a lot of open avenues, I guess, at the time. So that was like a really strong draw. And I felt like it left all my options open. And I enjoyed, all the different roles that I've had. I've enjoyed them, over the years. I've started out, in the hospital setting, which I loved. And I did that for a long, long time. But the thing that kind of got me with that was just the schedule. The every other weekend, the evenings, you have to cover night shift, then you got to come in at 7. And, it was like exciting and it was acute care. And, for a brief period of time when I was in one hospital out here, we were living in Phoenix, Arizona at the time when I was a new pharmacist, we got to be on the code team. Like it was like an adrenaline rush, like you enjoyed what you did because you were like actively involved, and everything. And I remember going on a code in the ICU and, just all of that. You felt like you're really part of the healthcare team, but there was just burnout that happened as a result of that because the schedule is just very hard, So, and I did that for a while. I did home infusion for a while, that kind of the home care infusion that kind of got big right after that. Enjoyed that too. Then once we started having children, I was more in an HMO setting because I had a more normalized life, I guess, where you could kind of set your schedule a little bit better, not so crazy all over the place. Worked on my doctorate and went back to school, got my PharmD, then did some medical writing for a little while for LexiComp that was there in Hudson. Wolters Kluwer now I think they are, but not just a little bit of per diem work for them. And then I ended up, in retail, which was the last place, that I thought I'd ever end up. But this little store, it was Target, but it was in Streetsboro, Ohio, Nate. You probably know where that is, okay?
All too well, yeah.
All too well, right? And that was a new store, and they were looking for pharmacists. And I remember they were so desperate, and they said, and I wasn't sure. I was kind of finishing up my doctorate. I wasn't really sure what direction I wanted to go. But I'm like, well, I have to get childcare. By this time I had my third child and she was still kind of little. And they're like, no, just bring her with you to the interview. I'm like, okay. So, like I've never had that happen before. And I did. And they're like, well, when can you start? And I'm like, okay, I just let me set up childcare. You know what I mean? And it was like this nice job. I mean, I really never expected it, but I was like in the weeds, with all the people that were there. And I just, I really enjoyed it. I felt like I was a business owner in a lot of ways back then. Target, it was a different vibe. You know what I mean? We had a half hour for lunch. We had a microwave in the pharmacy. I mean, you felt like it was your own little domain. And I saw all the moms and all the kids and all the people that I knew from Hudson, where I lived in Ohio. And it was fun. That's all I could say. It's that I worked 3-4 days a week and I enjoyed it. I got to know my patients. And then, job change with my husband kind of forced us down a different road. And retail just didn't get as fun anymore. And it's gotten a lot harder, I think, and it's really tough for those that are in the independent scene as well, So anyway, things have changed. And, I took a chance with a couple of different chains in the South, didn't really care for them. We ended up back here in Scottsdale, Arizona, which I'm really happy about. We've been here for about 5 years. And now I'm working in actually a startup, but it's not really a startup because it's been around for a couple of years, where we look to find solutions for patients that have like inborn errors of metabolism, like PKU or maple syrup urine disease, or some of these other genetic conditions that you're very thankful that your child does not have because it's a lifelong condition. And, I trying to work with other pharmacies and DME providers to get these types of things covered for these patients. A very specialized kind of niche area here. So, and it's good. We're a retail pharmacy, but that is what we kind of specialize. And it's been a whole different thing, an independent kind of retail setting in some ways, the greatest people in the world at AlphaScript to work for. So in that aspect, it's been, much, much better, but it's a big, huge pivot, So anyway, so that's like my pharmacy stuff. I mean, like I say, I was a pharmacist for a long time, so there's lots of pieces. So anyway.
And meanwhile, you've been shifting gears a little bit, right? So they're still staying in the pharmacy space, but also doing more in the entrepreneurial side, right? So tell us about that. What's the story there?
Yeah. So about 4 years ago or so, 4 or 5 years ago, right after we moved here to Phoenix, and I was kind of frustrated with the whole retail chain vibe, so to speak, I saw one of my pharmacist colleagues that I've known, and she worked as a medical liaison director. So she had a pretty high-end job in the pharma industry. And she left, a very good job that I would have never left. Okay. Just making it clear, because I'm very security, and all that. So wouldn't have left that. So she ended up going and she started this side hustle with an e-commerce online, business in health and wellness and made enough to where she either matched her income or close to it or exceeded it. It was enough that she could walk away. Okay. Because she had 3 little children and she was tired of all the ups and downs. And I just saw what she did, and I'm just like, and I always wanted to have my own thing. I just didn't know what that thing would be, I guess, was, kind of the thing. Like, you kind of know you want to do something. And there were certain jobs where, like, especially when I was at Target, because it was so new and so, like, just not a startup, but like, you feel like you're the one in charge there because you're the only one there, So I saw this with her and I'm like, wow, so that kind of started all of this, with the entrepreneurship, because at some point, you're working different careers or different, roles within your career. And you're thinking, gosh, can I really become an entrepreneur? And then you kind of think, maybe there just isn't the opportunity out there. But there was always this nagging desire, that, I wanted to do something like that. And so when I saw that kind of pushed me, and it was kind of a low risk, low barrier way to get into something that I could try to work and build up upon myself, So that's kind of what got me going. It just opened my mind up to, like, a lot of self-development and just a lot of growth that could happen, because you start just looking at yourself and what, you can do, I guess. So, but that's kind of in the nutshell how I got started with the entrepreneur thinking. Okay. Now, my parents also owned, they were Italian immigrants, but they also owned duplexes. My parents did, so I did see that as well, having that as like a rental income. I didn't really know much about it, because I was younger and I was in college and all this other stuff when they were starting all of this. And then I got married. So I wasn't really part of what their ins and outs with that. But I do remember them having that and getting that, rental. It was a long-term rental income. So I was kind of exposed to that, as well.
One of the themes that I'm hearing out of this that you mentioned early on is burnout too, that you've felt that burnout in that early acute care job. You've seen burnout in other industries. And I think that if you ask people in a lot of industries, that burnout is a thing right now. And it's something that pharmacy isn't immune from, that a lot of the world is dealing with that. So in terms of some of the mindset and things that you're latching on to, can you talk with us a little bit about burnout and kind of reshaping that and kind of overcoming some of those issues?
Okay. Burnout is a funny, all-inclusive word. You could really love what you do, but you still may suffer burnout just because you're doing it so much, or the hours and schedule just don't work with your family and you're frustrated and all of that. So, and I don't see that going away, for any industry, much less our industry. I think pharmacists have been suffering from burnout for a long, long time, honestly, but they've just been so, dedicated in a lot of ways. And it's been hard for them to manage it as well. And I see more of us now speaking up and kind of understanding that, you've got to take care of yourself, first before you're able to service your patients, So I think women especially are just, I've been reading all these statistics about women that have left the workforce in the last couple of years because they've had to, so they end up, they're frustrated because of this COVID has kind of forced them into this situation where now they have to manage taking care of their children, homeschooling them, all these things. And a lot of these women are not coming back. They took this time to look at, what they were doing and they're just like, well, I don't want this for myself anymore. I'm going to try to figure out a different way, to have my life the way I like it, so that I'm not compromising the time I have, with my children. I am there and I'm more present as a spouse, as a wife, mother, caregiver, whatever it is, but I'm more present. So I think a lot of people have I think that the COVID pandemic, a couple of good things that came of that has been, it's allowed for people to reevaluate their burnout situation and to just really think about what is important to them. And I think it's made, employers especially like understand that if you're sick, you're sick. You know what I mean? You can't come into work, and that was always something like I was always the martyr. Like I never called off sick, I mean, I'm sure you guys are the same way. Like you don't call off sick unless you're like half dead or somebody in your family needs you, like that was kind of how it is.
Right.
We're all like that, like, and so, I think it's just changed all of it for the good, because you need to take care of yourself. I think that, and I think like, putting in and being able to get vacation. I'm hearing more and more companies that give unlimited vacation. Now, whether people take unlimited time, I don't even know what that means. But, like in my world, it's always, I have to find a pharmacist to work for me, kind of thing, so it's just a whole different thing that I think is not going away. I think that even when things get more normal, I think you're going to see, people just, they've made the determination that their life as they want it is, much more important now than how it used to be.
That's what I'm wondering, right? Do you think people are going to just go back to the way it was? Or do you think that
no.
And I think something that you're advocating for, right, is really that shift toward you going after that life that you want to live instead of.
That's right.
I love that.
Yeah. Life by design, not by default. That is huge. And it's not something that, it's easy to say, but you have to just kind of think about, and one exercise that, I talk about doing is where you take a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, you draw a line down the middle and you write down kind of where you are on the left side. Like you have debt, you're frustrated because you're working too many 12-hour days, you never get a break, you feel beat up. All the things on the one side. And then on the other side, you write down and you kind of do a brain dump where you write down the things that you want to see for yourself. Like you want to be able to take time off to go see your grown kids, for instance. That's my big thing, is to be able to take time off to see my grown children now, because I'm not so concerned about having time off for family things like going to, baseball games or tennis matches for my kids. But now I'm worried about being able to see my grown children, and things like that, So you think about that. You think about, well, gosh, do I want to have a vacation home? Do I want to be able to, do I want time freedom? Do I want more money? Do I need more money? Do I want to look at my retirement? How long do I really want to work? Like all these things, like, do I like working just a day or two a week? There are people that, say they don't like being home all the time, without something to do. All these things, you just write them down and you go back and forth and you see where you are and you see where you want to be. And that's just an exercise that I enjoy doing and I've, coached others to do. And it's kind of the thing where you're looking at, these are the shoulds or the gotta do's. Like I got to find a job and I got to do this and I got to pay off debt and then there's things about what you'd like to do, like what your dream is to do. Like, what is your dream in 10 years, 5, 10 years, 20 years? I never envisioned myself really retiring. I always feel like I'll be always doing something, so I've always had that in my head, but I don't know that that's something is going to be, standing in a pharmacy all day. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how, I look at this. So I think just thinking about, for us, thinking about what you have now and where you'd like to be at some point, I think is just a really powerful exercise. And to just get really quiet and just do like a total like brain dump on a piece of paper. And that's like a place kind of, to start, I guess. So
yeah, and that's a great example of even just the seasons of life, like wanting to be able to go to the kids' soccer games when they are at home and wanting to go visit the kids when they live elsewhere. And like the difference in terms of how you might define flexibility in a career.
Correct.
So I love that example. What are some other examples or other ways that you've seen pharmacists make this kind of life by design, not by default? I love that. What are some ways you've seen pharmacists design their life rather than live it by default?
Well, I've seen other pharmacists, like the one pharmacist that, grew an online business. I know quite a few functional medicine practitioners, honestly, that have grown online and in person, like businesses, so lots of those examples. I know people that are in the real estate space that are pharmacists. In fact, one of the first Your Financial Pharmacist podcasts that I listened to was where someone was talking about how she was doing a house hack. And she lived on one side and rented the, like, it was a long time ago, one of the first things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea. Like all these, I've seen people do all kinds of stuff, writing books, starting a magazine, I follow lots and lots of podcasters that are out there as well with different types of content, pharmacists that are talking about starting online businesses, pharmacists that are talking about, there's one pharmacist that does like medical writing, like there's just different types of avenues, pharmacogenomics. I just follow a lot of different pharmacists that are doing a lot of different things. And they didn't start out where, all of these people, we're seeing their successes now, but they started out where they were working full time. They were working full time and they started to add these other opportunities as they developed them, what they'd like to do. They just added them on. They weren't where they were something where they just said, oh, I'm leaving my job today and I'm just going to go over here and do this. It was like a more gradual path, and it wasn't always perfect or linear, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So, and I think that's important to remember that.
And we're big advocates for that, right? Because if you look at real estate investing, right, you don't go buy your first property and then quit the pharmacy the next day. Like this is
Right.
a slow
No.
burn that you can accumulate over time, just like any other passion you want to follow, right? It does not have to be one or nothing, right? Or all or nothing.
Correct.
So what are some of the blocks that you see? Because you coach a lot of people to get to that goal, right? So what are some of the blocks that you see people running into that are hard to get over?
The biggest block is just, what you're supposed to do, but you just don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's really, really important. Let me back up. It's really important though to have a very clear vision of what you want though. That you have to have that first, I guess. And I kind of advocate, I follow a lot of the teachings of Bob Proctor, Thinking into Results, where he talks about how, you write down your goals. Like you write down, the things that you want now and the things that you think about having, long term. Like you write these things down. And that part may or may not, be easy. It depends. Like people kind of know what they want, but then it's trying to think of a way to put that into action that's difficult, I think. For some people, they don't always have the resources. Some people can go ahead and hire a business coach and say, hey, I have this great idea. I want to go do this, And then there's others that they have to employ, I reached out and started listening to podcasts and I read books and I started just surrounding myself with those that had done it. That's the other huge thing is look at people that have done what you want. Okay. Because you're always going to have somebody telling you, you can't do this, you will. Somebody will say that somewhere about something, no matter what. Oh, real estate investing, that's so risky. What are you talking about? You're crazy. You know what I mean? You're going to hear that. Okay. Right. And you're going to hear that about other kinds of online businesses and some of these businesses that these pharmacists are doing on the side. I would have never thought of them, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. That's really neat that they're doing something. Maybe they'll leave their job someday. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll do both of them together. It doesn't have to be an absolute. I think that that's the important part in all of this. But I think the biggest issue is, you have to have a goal and then you have to figure out a way to work to that goal. Okay. And it has to be a big enough goal to where it's not something that you can do really easily, and it can't be really a should goal. Like I should do this, I should do that. It's I want to do this goal kind of thing, I guess. So that would be, my thoughts on that.
I think a lot of those kind of really inspiring goals tend to have some kind of financial underpinning to it, right? Like you need an income
Absolutely.
to move forward.
Right.
So a lot of these involve business opportunities or angles where you can do something on the side to create additional income, those kind of things. Obviously, we talk about real estate investing a lot on this podcast. So can you talk a little bit about how you see real estate investing specifically fitting into that flexibility and life by design?
I think there's lots of opportunities with, real estate investing, honestly. But I think for pharmacists, and I understand being risk averse. I mean, I really do. I'm risk averse. So, it's but I think with getting enough knowledge to where you're comfortable and you're understanding and, you look at resources to help you, you can go ahead and maybe it is taking a small step. You know what I mean? Towards something. Some of the best advice that I saw that I listened to that I can't remember whose podcast it was, if it was Bigger Pockets or, a book that I read, I read Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad and his Cash Flow Quadrant and all these other books. And they talked about, well, what about if you live in a high rent area? Like my son lives in San Francisco where you can't afford anything, so what about buying a house in some little town somewhere, something you can afford, renting that out. All right. And that offsets, what you have to pay, there's just all these different options with that. And I think that the important thing is to just get as educated as you can. It doesn't always have to cost money because I've gotten a lot of my information through podcasts and through, free master classes and things like that. And then just, reach out and start to develop a plan of something that you would like to do, and I think that kind of helps you to get over the risk averse, aspect of it,
Yeah, I love that. That makes a ton of sense. And you actually have your own investment property yourself, right? You have a long-term rental that's part of your strategy, helping you live that life. So tell us just a little bit about that. How does that supplement that?
Okay. Well, it's kind of an interesting sort of story. I didn't really have much about real estate. Growing up, my parents had these duplexes. But in the early 1990s, my husband and I, we ended up losing money on our first home. We bought it too high. It was kind of booming out here. And then we sold it and it was like less than we paid for. And I remember being so devastated because I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean the housing has gone down? Like, I just couldn't even like wrap my head. It was a really hard lesson. Okay. At a time where we were, barely getting our feet wet. And anyway, so it taught me such a good lesson about being prepared and understanding how all of this works. It was probably one of the best things in some ways that could have happened to us, because then I learned, and then I started to love real estate because I started to learn about real estate and how it worked and looking at comps and the markets and all these things at a time where we didn't even have all those resources available at our fingertips the way we do now, So with that, the long-term rental came in. It was my parents, as I mentioned, had duplexes, and, they passed away. My mom finally passed away 2 years ago. And that was finally, I inherited it of all things. But I had been managing it because my parents had been ill. It's been a whole protracted long story. And I had been managing it for over, 10 years. So I was very much aware of like what, goes into it. And I see it as, not a huge, amount of cash flow, but a nice cash flow. It's like that nice supplemental income that could maybe contribute to a nice, vacation, maybe contribute to paying off some debt, maybe contribute to, some expenses that you weren't expecting, so that's where I see it. And I would absolutely like to, add additional properties to that. I'm still kind of trying to decide the direction I'd like to go, and where I'd want to do that. So I'm kind of still investigating all of that, but that is something that, I do very much enjoy.
Well, I think that's kind of a great way to describe it too, because one of the things that I hear a lot of discussion about is multiple income streams driving security and driving options and driving flexibility. And you're right, one single property probably isn't going to replace your whole pharmacist income, right? But one single property may create that nice cash flow. So I'm curious what kind of you've learned about in that 10 years of managing and seeing that one property that makes you think through the desire for more rental properties as more income streams and why there's value there.
I have some lessons that I learned, and they're kind of like my bottom lines. First thing is that I do my homework always. I'm always looking, and I'm always looking at comps. I'm looking at the markets. I'm, just kind of following the trends. So I do that for sure. So I feel like I'm really comfortable in certain areas, more than others. The next thing is I don't ever think about falling in love with the property. Okay. Like that was the mistake we made with our first home, I think, and we overpaid for it. Was because you fell in love with it. And that, like, even if you think you're going to be in something and it's going to be a long-term rental, which is what this ended up being, my rental that I have is a long-term rental. But even if that's the case, I feel like you shouldn't really fall in love with it. You just have to treat it like the investment that it is. And you have to just look at the numbers and not fall in love. That's another thing. Okay. And then the other thing is not to overpay. That's probably my cardinal rule, is not to overpay no matter what. Even if you're going to be there for a million years, don't overpay for your property, because in the long run, you're right, you'll be fine, and that's what I saw with these duplexes. They've all appreciated nicely. They were built a long time ago. Now it's just the maintenance costs that were, new roofs and, concrete and things like that you have to do after you have something that's very long term. But overall, if you take care of them, they will continue to produce, a monthly income.
I love those little rules you went through. That just helps to kind of make those risk-averse pharmacists less nervous about those moves. And I think that's great.
Yeah, because that's how I am. And I was so scared after we lost money on our first home that I thought, buy a house? Are people nuts? I was like, how, that's how I felt at the time. But then, you learned, that was a hard mistake, but it was one of the best learning mistakes I think I've made.
Well, I appreciate it. I want to jump now to our final infusion questions. These are the same 3 questions we ask each guest on the show, get an idea of your take and your experience. So we'll jump right in with number 1, with what is one tangible strategy that you use to make sure that your entrepreneurship works hand in hand with your career as a pharmacist?
Okay. For me, it's really important that I do time blocking. I have certain days set aside for certain things. with my, real estate investment, my online business. They tend to not be the days I'm at the pharmacy, because when I'm at the pharmacy, I'm very preoccupied and doing, my role there as, pharmacist in charge, and I'm just mentally drained, so they tend to be the days that I'm not there, or the mornings, or sometimes in the evening. If I'm in the right state of mind, I will block time. But that has been a huge thing, to just have that calendar integrity and to block time out. Okay. So that's probably my most, tangible thing that I do.
No, that's great. What's one resource that's been most helpful to you in your entrepreneurship journey, whether that's a book, podcast, person, author, website, whatever that would be?
Lots of them. Your financial pharmacist started out with that. And then now that your podcast here, your real estate investing, that's been great. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I really like the chapter on faith, and the whole mindset of just changing your mindset has to do with, adopting more of a faith that it's going to work out fine versus this, panic or, doubt or fear, I guess. So there's just that book has been great. I've read so many different books. I've listened to different podcasts. I like listening to podcasts where women talk about how they've built online businesses, because that's something that interests me as well. And a lot of these skills I've noticed are very transferable. The things that you learn, I've listened to Bigger Pockets. That's another one of my favorites. Julie Ciardi has a podcast that she talked about, why you need a side hustle, and the skills and the information that I'm hearing there. I'm also hearing in Bigger Pockets. I'm hearing it all over. I'm reading it. So those are just a few of the resources that I've used that I've really enjoyed and I go back to.
Yeah, it's a great point about the skills being transferable too. No matter what you're doing, right? If you're trying to figure out something else besides the day-to-day grind, you're going to learn skills that are going to help you do other things within that space. Like my real estate investment side hustle is helping me with other things that I'd never thought it would, which has been really fun. So that's a great tip. All right. And then our final one, number 3, what's one piece of advice that you give to a pharmacist that's contemplating a start in either real estate investing or really any sort of entrepreneurship?
I would tell them if I could go back to my 20-something-year-old self, it would be start now. Just because you don't know how things are going to be. Pharmacists, when I got out of school, it was like one of the most secure jobs you could imagine. You know what I mean? You never worried about finding a job and things just change. You don't know, you want to be prepared. So I think I would just say, you start now, you start learning, you start, thinking about, you draw the line on a piece of paper, think about where you are, where you want to be, and just start, even if it's just baby steps. You have to get going and you have to think ahead, I think. So that would be my advice.
That's great. If people want to connect with you, learn more about you, how can people find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and it is Dr. Louisa Wolowiecki, Impact Your Life. And then I'm also on Instagram at dr.louisa.pharmd. And I have options where y'all can book a clarity call with me, and we can talk about all these things and kind of discuss, what types of services that I provide and how I can help you. So, and I'd love that very much.
Yeah, I love that. I think, anytime you're having trouble getting started or taking those first couple of steps, a coach, somebody to just get your mindset back on track, that's exactly why I wanted to have you on today, because that can help so much. Even if it's just talking to another peer or someone else that's doing what you're doing, those kind of things can really start to move you forward. And then that coach or whoever can keep you on track. And I think that's great. So I encourage people to at least connect with you at the very least, and hopefully even book a call to do more. So great stuff.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. And I've appreciated that when that's been available to me as well, and sometimes it isn't even what, you may talk to someone and you just get the idea for something else. It doesn't have to be necessarily real estate or e-commerce. It could be yet another idea over here, So anyway, so there's just lots and lots of options. But
well, Louisa, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. I think hopefully people are fired up about getting their mindset back on track so they can start achieving those goals. So appreciate you coming on, and I'm sure we'll be connecting in the future.
Awesome. Yes. Thanks. Thanks so very much for having me. I very much enjoyed this.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. If you like what you heard on today's show, please leave us a review and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. If you have a question, know someone that would make a good guest, or want to connect with Nate or David, head on over to yfprealestate.com and join the growing YFP Real Estate Investing Facebook group. As we conclude this week's episode of the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast, an important reminder that the content in this podcast is provided to you for your informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on this podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist, unless otherwise noted, and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you for your support of the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. Have a great rest of your week.